Well, the rain hadn't stopped for 3 days. It fell against the windows of the Kang estate like thousands of desperate fingers, tapping, pleading, trying to warn anyone about what was happening inside those walls. But the walls were thick. The secrets were thicker. And in that sprawling mansion on the edge of Seoul, where the city lights couldn't quite reach, darkness had made itself comfortable long ago. Sumin pressed her forehead against the cold glass of the service hallway window. She was 23 years old, but her eyes carried the weight of someone who had lived much longer. Not because she was wise, because she was tired. The kind of tired that sleep cannot cure. The kind that comes from years of being invisible in rooms full of powerful people who looked through you like you were made of air. She had been a maid at the Kang estate for 11 months. 11 months of silence. 11 months of keeping her head down, folding sheets that cost more than her monthly salary, preparing meals she would never taste, and pretending she didn't hear the conversations that floated through the halls like poison. Master Kang Yiwon was not a man. He was a storm wearing human skin. The Korean underworld whispered his name like a curse, and those who served in his household learned quickly that survival meant one thing: see nothing, hear nothing, know nothing. But Sumin had made a mistake. She hadn't meant to, God knows she hadn't meant to. 3 nights ago, while delivering fresh towels to the East Wing, she had walked past the study at the wrong moment. The door was cracked, the voices were raised, and before she could turn away, she heard it: dates, names, locations, things that powerful men kill to keep hidden. She had frozen, just for a heartbeat, just long enough for Kang Yiwon's cold eyes to find her through that narrow crack in the door. He hadn't said anything, he had simply stared, and then he had smiled. That smile had haunted her sleep ever since. Sumin pulled away from the window and looked down at her trembling hands. She needed to run. She knew she needed to run, but where? She had no family left. Her mother had died when she was 16, and her father had disappeared into his grief in a bottle shortly after. She had no money saved, the estate paid just enough to survive, never enough to escape. And besides, people didn't escape from Kang Yi-won. Everyone in Seoul knew that. People who crossed him didn't run, they simply stopped existing. Their names were erased, their histories forgotten. It was as if the universe itself was afraid to remember them. The clock in the hallway struck 11. Sumin closed her eyes and whispered a prayer to no one in particular. Maybe to her mother, maybe to the stars, maybe to the rain itself. Please, she breathed, please let me see tomorrow. She didn't know that her prayer was being heard. In the north tower of the estate, the part of the mansion that no servant was permitted to enter, the part that everyone pretended didn't exist, someone was listening. He stood by the window of his private chamber, his back straight, his hands clasped behind him. The rain outside painted silver rivers down the glass, but he didn't see the rain. His eyes, dark as midnight, ancient as stone, were focused somewhere far beyond the physical world. His name was Seojun. The staff who had been at the estate the longest sometimes whispered about him in the kitchen. They said he was a distant relative of Master Kang's family, some forgotten branch of the bloodline. They said he had been living in the North Tower for years, perhaps decades. They said he never aged. They said he wasn't quite human. Most of these whispers were true. Seojun was 412 years old. He had walked through the ashes of empires. He had seen kings rise and fall. He had tasted blood and glory and grief in equal measure. And now, after centuries of darkness, he had chosen solitude. He had asked for nothing but silence and shadows, and in exchange, he kept the estate protected from threats that mortal men couldn't comprehend. It was an arrangement, a transaction, nothing more. Or so he told himself. But lately, something had been changing. Lately, he had found himself listening for the soft footsteps of a particular maid in the East Wing. He had found himself watching from the shadows, always from the shadows, as she moved through the mansion with a quiet grace that reminded him of something he had lost long ago. He had noticed the way she spoke to the other staff, always kind, always gentle, even when the world gave her no kindness in return. He had noticed the sadness in her eyes. And tonight, he had heard the conversation in the West Corridor. The voices had been hushed, but Seojin's hearing was not bound by human limitations. He had heard every word. The maid, the one called Su Min. What about her? Master Kang believes she heard too much. He's given the order. When? Tonight, make it quiet, make it look like she ran. And if she fights, she won't, they never do. The conversation had ended, the footsteps had faded, and Seojin had stood perfectly still in his tower, feeling something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Rage. Not the cold, controlled anger he had mastered over centuries. This was something hotter, something almost human. It burned in his chest like a forgotten sun, and it whispered a single word over and over again. No, well, he shouldn't intervene. He knew this. He had spent 400 years learning that humans and their fragile, fleeting lives were not his concern. He had watched entire generations live and die, and he had trained himself to feel nothing. Attachment was weakness. Caring was death. And yet, there was something about this woman, something that made him remember who he had been before the darkness had claimed him, before the blood, before the endless, aching loneliness. She reminded him of sunlight, and he hadn't seen sunlight in so very long. At 11:30, two of Kang Yiwon's men descended the service stairs. Their footsteps were soft, practiced. They were good at this. They had done it many times before. Su Min was in the laundry room folding the last of the linens. Her back was to the door. She didn't hear them approach. One of the men pulled a syringe from his pocket. Quick, painless, that was how Master Kang preferred it, clean. Well, he stepped forward, and then he stopped. Because there was someone standing between him and the maid. Someone who had not been there a moment ago. Someone tall and still and impossibly silent. Oh, the temperature in the room dropped. The man with the syringe opened his mouth to speak, but the words died in his throat, because he was looking into a pair of eyes that were no longer dark brown. Oh, they were red. Not human red, not the red of blood or fire or sunset. This was the red of something older, something that existed before humans had words to describe fear. And from the shadows a voice spoke, low, quiet, absolute. Not while I breathes. The linen slipped from Su Min's hands. She spun around, her heart pounding against her ribs like a caged bird. She saw the two men frozen, their faces pale with a terror she didn't understand, and she saw him. The man from the North Tower. She had seen him only once before, months ago, just a glimpse through a window. She had told herself she imagined him. She had told herself shadows couldn't wear human faces. But he was here now, standing between her and death. His presence filled the room like a storm waiting to break. Run, he said without turning to look at her. The garden entrance, go. She couldn't move. Her legs refused to obey. Everything in her training told her this was wrong, that she should stay quiet, stay invisible, stay small. But his voice, oh, his voice. There was no cruelty in it, no demand. There was something else, something that sounded almost like pleading. Please, he whispered, and for the first time his ancient mask cracked, just a little, just enough for her to see the loneliness beneath. Let me save you. Su Min ran. She didn't know why she trusted him. She didn't know what he was. She only knew that something in his voice had touched the broken part of her heart and told her, this one will not hurt you. Behind her she heard no screams, no sounds of violence, just silence. And when she finally reached the garden entrance and burst into the cold, wet night, gasping for air, she turned back. He was standing in the doorway. The rain poured around him, but it didn't touch him. It was as if even the storm knew to keep its distance. For one long moment, their eyes met across the darkness. And then Su Min saw something that would haunt her forever. He smiled. Not the cruel smile of Kang Yi-won, not the empty smile of men who hold power over others. This was a smile of pure, overwhelming relief. the smile of someone who had been drowning for centuries and had finally found a reason to breathe. Go, he said softly. I will find you, but first, I have unfinished business with your former employer. Well, he turned back toward the mansion, and as Sumin stumbled into the night, into the rain, into an uncertain future, she heard something that made her blood run cold. From somewhere deep inside the Kang estate, a man began to scream. They moved through the night like shadows fleeing from shadows. Xiaojun led Sumin through paths that no human had walked in centuries, through forgotten tunnels beneath the city, through passages carved into mountainsides by hands that had turned to dust long ago, through the hidden arteries of a world that existed just beneath the surface of everything she had ever known. Sumin didn't ask questions. She couldn't. Every ounce of her energy was focused on putting one foot in front of the other, on keeping up with Xiaojun's impossible pace, on not collapsing from the fear and exhaustion that threatened to consume her. But even in her terror, she noticed things. She noticed the way Xiaojun never let go of her hand, the way his grip was firm but never painful, adjusting constantly to make sure she was comfortable. She noticed how he slowed his pace whenever her breathing became too ragged, how he caught her elbow when she stumbled, how he positioned his body between her and every doorway they passed through. He was protecting her, not just from the threats they were running from everything. And that realization made her heart ache in ways she didn't fully understand. They emerged from the tunnels into a valley that shouldn't have existed. Sumin stopped dead in her tracks, her breath catching in her throat. Before her stretched a landscape that belonged in dreams, or perhaps in the oldest fairy tales, the ones that parents told their children before the world became too modern to believe in magic. The valley was bathed in moonlight, silver and soft. Ancient trees lined its edges, their branches heavy with blossoms that glowed faintly in the darkness. A river wound through the center, its waters so clear that she could see the stones at the bottom, each one gleaming like a precious gem. And in the distance, nestled against the mountain's heart, stood a structure that defied description. It was a palace, but not like any palace she had ever seen in photographs or history books. This one seemed to have grown from the mountain itself, its walls carved from living stone, its towers reaching toward the sky like prayers frozen in architecture. Lights flickered in its windows, not electric lights, but something older, warmer, more alive. Welcome to Yonhua, Xiaojun said softly, and there was something in his voice that sounded almost like coming home. The Valley of Eternal Blossoms. It has been hidden from human eyes for over 800 years. Asumin couldn't speak, she could only stare. This is where I was born, Xiaojun continued. Not as a vampire, as a man. I lived here once in a time before the darkness claimed me, before I forgot what it meant to belong somewhere. He turned to look at her, and the moonlight caught his features in a way that made him look almost ethereal. This is the only place in the world where the Council cannot reach us. The old magic protects it. As long as we remain within the valley, we are safe. Sumin finally found her voice. For how long? Xiaojun's expression flickered. That is a complicated question. The palace was even more breathtaking up close. As they approached the massive gates, Sumin realized that the structure wasn't abandoned as she had initially thought. There were people here, or rather, there were beings here. She caught glimpses of figures moving in the shadows, watching them with curious eyes. Some of them looked human, others didn't. Do not be afraid, Xiaojun murmured, sensing her tension. The inhabitants of Yonhua are bound by ancient laws of hospitality. No harm will come to you within these walls. What are they? Sumin whispered back. Refugees like us. Xiaojun's voice carried a weight of old sorrow. Creatures who no longer fit in the world above. Vampires who rejected the council's cruelty. Spirits who chose kindness over chaos. Beings who simply wanted to exist in peace. He paused at the gates and placed his palm against the cold stone. I built this sanctuary 3 centuries ago, he said quietly. After Yuna died, after I understood what kind of monster I had become, I wanted to create a place where no one would ever have to feel as alone as she did, as alone as I did. The gates swung open silently. I haven't been back in over 50 years, Siajan admitted. I left to punish myself, I suppose. I didn't feel I deserved the peace this place offered. Sumin looked at him, really looked at him, and she saw something she hadn't noticed before, the way his shoulders curved inward just slightly, the way his eyes never quite met hers for more than a moment, the way he held himself like someone who was constantly bracing for a blow that never came. He wasn't just a vampire king who had lived for 4 centuries. He was a man who had spent 4 centuries believing he didn't deserve to be loved. And that broke her heart more than anything else. Inside the palace, a woman was waiting for them. She was tall and elegant, with silver hair that cascaded down her back like moonlight given physical form. Her eyes were the color of amethyst, and they sparkled with an intelligence that seemed to see everything at once. She was beautiful, breathtakingly so, but there was a warmth in her expression that made her approachable rather than intimidating. Siajan, she said, and her voice carried the music of centuries. After all this time, you finally return and you bring a guest. Siajan bowed his head respectfully. Elder Murray, I apologize for the circumstances of my return. The woman, Murray, waved her hand dismissively. Circumstances are irrelevant. What matters is that you're here. Her amethyst eyes shifted to Su Min and they softened. And you, child, you must be exhausted. Come, let us get you warm and fed before we discuss the storm that follows at your heels. Su Min opened her mouth to protest, to say that they didn't have time, that danger was coming, that every moment they wasted brought the council closer, but her body betrayed her. Her knees buckled, and suddenly she was falling. The Siajan caught her before she hit the ground. She hasn't slept in 3 days, he said, his voice tight with concern. She's been running on fear and adrenaline. She needs rest. Murray nodded, her expression grave. Take her to the east wing, the room with the cherry blossom view. I'll have food and clean clothes sent up. Siajan lifted Su Min in his arms as if she weighed nothing. She wanted to protest, to insist that she could walk, but her body refused to cooperate. Instead, she found herself leaning into his chest, feeling the strange stillness where a heartbeat should have been. Rest now, Siajan murmured against her hair. I'll watch over you. And despite everything, despite the danger, despite the fear, despite the impossibility of her situation, Su Min believed him. She closed her eyes. And for the first time in 11 months, she slept without nightmares. When Su Min woke, the sun was setting. She lay still for a moment, disoriented. The bed beneath her was softer than anything she had ever felt, and the sheets smelled of lavender and something else, something ancient and comforting that she couldn't name. Through the window, she could see the valley spread out before her, bathed in the golden light of dusk. And sitting in a chair by the window, perfectly still, was Siajan. He was watching the sunset with an expression of such profound longing that Su Min felt like an intruder. She knew instinctively that vampires couldn't walk in sunlight, that this moment, watching the sun sink below the horizon, was as close as he could ever get to the light. You're awake, he said without turning around. His voice was gentle. How do you feel? Su Min sat up slowly, taking inventory of her body. The exhaustion had faded, replaced by a bone-deep weariness that was manageable. Someone had changed her clothes while she slept. She was now wearing a simple hanbok of pale blue silk, more beautiful than anything she had ever owned. Better, she admitted. How long was I asleep? 14 hours. She blinked. 14, but the council, Kang Yi-won, we don't have time to. We have time, Siajan interrupted calmly. The valley's magic confuses those who seek it. Even the council's trackers will need at least 3 days to find the entrance. We have until then to prepare. Prepare for what? Siajan finally turned to face her, and in the fading light, she saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Determination, resolve, and beneath it all, a flicker of something that looked almost like peace. I'm going to face them, he said simply. The council, Kang Yi-won, all of it. Sumin's heart stopped. What? No, you said yourself, the council doesn't negotiate. They don't forgive if you go to them. If I don't go to them, they will tear this world apart looking for us. Seojin rose from his chair and crossed the room to stand before her. Sumin, you don't understand what the council is. They are the oldest vampires in existence. They have ruled the shadows since before recorded history. Their power is absolute and their patience is infinite. If I hide here, they will wait, they will watch, and eventually they will find a way in. He knelt before her, bringing his face level with hers. But if I go to them willingly, if I stand before them and accept responsibility for my actions, there is a chance, a small one, a chance to negotiate, to bargain, to protect you and everyone else in this valley. The tears were forming in Sumin's eyes. You'll die. Perhaps. Then don't go, please, her voice cracked. I'm not worth your life, I'm nobody. I'm just a maid who was in the wrong place at the wrong time. I'm not worth. Oh, you're worth everything. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with 400 years of loneliness and one impossible night of connection. You are worth everything, Seojin repeated, softer now. Not because of what you can do, not because of who you know, but because of who you are. Because you looked at a monster and saw a man, because you touched my hand and didn't flinch. Because in the few hours I have known you, you have made me feel more alive than I have felt in 4 centuries. Well, he reached up and gently brushed a tear from her cheek. I have spent so long believing I didn't deserve redemption, believing that my sins were too great, my darkness too deep. But you make me want to try. You make me want to be the man I was before all of this. The man who believed in kindness. The man who believed that love was stronger than fear. He stood, and his expression hardened with resolve. So yes, I'm going to face the council, not because I want to die, but because, for the first time in 400 years, I have something worth living for, and I will fight for it with everything I have. The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparation and painful conversations. Sumin learned more about the world she had stumbled into, the ancient hierarchies of vampire society, the delicate balance of power that had kept the supernatural world hidden from humanity for millennia, the terrible price that was paid whenever that balance was disrupted. She learned about the council, 5 ancient vampires, each one older than recorded history, each one wielding power that could reshape reality itself. They were not evil, Murray explained carefully. They were simply absolute. They had existed for so long that they had lost the ability to understand human concepts like mercy or compassion. To them, rules were everything, and Seojin had broken the most sacred rule of all. He had interfered with human affairs to protect a mortal. He had chosen a human over his own kind. In the council's eyes, this was not romance. It was not heroism. It was treason. On the evening of the 3rd day, Seojin stood at the gates of Yeonhwa. He was dressed in formal robes of black and silver, the traditional garments of a vampire lord appearing before the council. His hair was tied back, revealing the sharp angles of his face. His expression was calm, composed, utterly unreadable. But Sumin could see his hands. They were trembling. You don't have to do this, she said, one last desperate attempt. We could run, find somewhere else to hide. There has to be another way. Seojin shook his head slowly. There isn't, and even if there was, I'm tired of running, Sumin. I've been running from what I am for 400 years, running from my guilt, running from my grief, running from the possibility that I might actually deserve happiness. Well, he turned to face her fully. Tonight I stop running. Tonight I stand and face the consequences of my choices, whatever those consequences may be. He reached into his robes and withdrew something small and delicate, a pendant on a silver chain. It was beautiful, carved from a stone that seemed to hold moonlight within its depths. This belonged to my mother, he said, pressing it into Sumin's hands. She gave it to me on the night I was turned. She told me that as long as I carried it, a piece of her love would always be with me. His fingers closed around hers. Now I'm giving it to you, not as a goodbye, as a promise that I will come back, a promise that whatever happens tonight, you will not face the future alone. Sumin clutched the pendant to her chest, tears streaming freely down her face. Siajan. Wait for me, he whispered. That's all I ask, just wait for me. He leaned forward and pressed his lips to her forehead, a kiss so gentle, so tender that it felt like a prayer. Then he turned and walked into the night. And Su Min watched him go, her heart breaking with every step he took away from her. The council convened in a place that existed outside of normal space and time. Siajan had been here once before, centuries ago, when he had first been granted his territory and his responsibilities. He remembered the overwhelming sense of ancient power, the weight of millennia pressing down on his shoulders, the feeling of being utterly insignificant in the presence of beings who had watched civilizations rise and fall. It was worse now, because now he had something to lose. The chamber was vast and circular, carved from black stone that seemed to absorb light. 5 thrones stood at the far end, arranged in a semicircle, and on those thrones sat the 5 oldest vampires in existence. Lord Cain the first, his eyes were empty, hollow, like looking into the void itself. Lady Nyx the Shadow Walker, her form flickered constantly as if she existed in multiple places at once. Lord Thanatos, the Death Bringer, his presence alone made the air heavy with the weight of ended lives. Lady Selene, the Moon's daughter, she was the only one who looked remotely human with silver hair and sad eyes. And in the center, on the highest throne, sat the oldest of them all. The Ancient One, the vampire who had no name because names had not existed when he was born. He was so old that his features had become impossible to define. Sometimes he looked like a young man, sometimes like an elderly sage, sometimes like something that had never been human at all. Siajan of the Eastern Territory, the Ancient One spoke, and his voice echoed through the chamber like thunder. You have been accused of breaking the first covenant, of interfering with human affairs, of choosing a mortal over your own kind. How do you plead? Siajan stood in the center of the chamber, alone and small against the vastness of ancient power. Guilty, he said clearly. A murmur rippled through the shadows. Even the council members seemed surprised by his directness. You do not deny it, Lady Nyx asked, her voice like whispers in a dark room. I do not. I saved a human woman from assassination. I killed no one, but I used my abilities to protect her. I broke the covenant knowingly and willingly. Siajan raised his chin, and I would do it again. Lord Thanatos leaned forward, his hollow eyes fixed on Siajan with cold interest. You understand the punishment for such a crime? Your existence will be ended, your territory dissolved, your name erased from the histories of our kind. You will become nothing. I understand. And yet you show no fear, no regret. The Ancient One's voice was curious now, almost intrigued. Explain yourself, young one. Help us understand why you would throw away 4 centuries of existence for a single mortal life. Siajan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of everything he had learned, everything he had suffered, everything he had finally come to understand. Because I was wrong, he said simply. The council waited. For 400 years, I believed what we are taught, that humans are lesser beings, that their short lives make them insignificant, that caring for them is weakness, and weakness leads to destruction. He paused, and his eyes found Lady Selene, the only council member who had ever shown him kindness. But I watched a woman die because I believed those things. A good woman, an innocent woman. She died because I was too proud, too afraid, too convinced of my own superiority to save her. His voice cracked. I have carried that guilt for 4 centuries. It has shaped everything I am, everything I have done. I built a sanctuary for those rejected by our kind. I spent decades learning to control my hunger. I tried so hard to become something worthy of the second chance I never asked for. He stepped forward, and the ancient power in the room pressed against him like a physical force, but he didn't stop. And then I met her, Su Min, a maid, a nobody by the world's standards, but she looked at me, at the monster I am, and she didn't see a creature to be feared. She saw a person in pain, a person worth saving. Tears were flowing now. Siajan hadn't cried in centuries, but he couldn't stop them. She taught me something that 400 years of existence couldn't. She taught me that the measure of a soul isn't in how long it exists, but in how much it loves, how much it gives, how much it sacrifices for others. Oh, he fell to his knees. So yes, I broke the covenant. I saved a human life. And I would do it again, 1,000 times over, because she is worth more than all the centuries of empty existence I have endured. She is worth more than the power we hoard and the rules we enforce and the cold immortality we call a gift. He looked up at the Ancient One, and there was no fear in his eyes, only peace. If that makes me a traitor to my kind, then so be it. I would rather die knowing I finally became the man I was meant to be, than live forever as the monster I was becoming. A silence, a complete, absolute silence. For a long moment, nothing moved, nothing breathed. The very fabric of reality seemed to hold its breath. And then something extraordinary happened. Lady Selene stood from her throne. "I invoke the right of testimony," she said, her voice ringing through the chamber. "As is my privilege as a council member, I claim the right to speak on behalf of the accused." The other council members turned to look at her with expressions ranging from surprise to displeasure. "Selene," Lord Kane growled, "this is unprecedented." "It is my right," she interrupted calmly. "A right granted to me by laws older than even you, First One. I invoke it now." She descended from her throne and walked to stand beside Siajan. "I have watched this one for centuries," she said, addressing her fellow council members. "I watched him when he was first turned angry, lost, drowning in darkness. I watched him spiral into despair after the servant girl's death. I watched him build his sanctuary one stone at a time with his own hands. I watched him turn away from blood, turn away from power, turn away from everything our kind values." She placed her hand on Siajan's shoulder. And I asked myself, why would a vampire, a creature of hunger and darkness, choose such a difficult path? Why would he fight against his own nature, century after century, with no hope of reward? She looked at the Ancient One. "I think after tonight I finally understand. He did it because he believed, truly believed, that kindness matters, that compassion matters, that even monsters can choose to be something better." Her amethyst eyes shone with something that looked almost like tears. "Is that not what we ourselves were, once, before the endless centuries stripped away our humanity? Were we not beings who believed in love, in sacrifice, in the bonds that connect us to others?" She stepped forward, addressing the entire council. "We have spent millennia enforcing the covenant, maintaining the separation between our world and theirs, but look at what we have become. Cold, empty, hollow, we exist, but we do not live, we endure, but we do not feel." She gestured to Siajan. "This one, this traitor, he is more alive than any of us have been in centuries. He has found something we lost long ago, something precious, something worth protecting." She turned back to the Ancient One. "I ask the council to consider mercy, not because the accused deserves it by our laws, but because, in showing mercy, we might remember what it means to be more than monsters." Another long silence. Then, slowly, the Ancient One rose from his throne. He descended the steps and approached Siajan, stopping just a few feet away. Up close, his features shifted constantly, young and old, beautiful and terrible, human and utterly alien. "You believe that love is stronger than fear," the Ancient One said. It wasn't a question. Siajan met his gaze. "I do. And you would die for this belief." "I would." The Ancient One studied him for a long moment, and then, incredibly, impossibly, the corner of his mouth twitched. It might have been a smile. I was human once, the Ancient One said quietly. 10,000 years ago, give or take a millennium, I had a family, a wife, children. I loved them more than anything in this world. Well, his expression grew distant. When I was turned, I thought I had to forget them. I thought that becoming a vampire meant becoming something beyond human concerns. I told myself that love was weakness, that attachment was death, that the only way to survive eternity was to become as cold and empty as the void itself. Well, he looked at Siajan. I was wrong. The chamber rippled with shock. Even the other council members seemed stunned. The cold and the emptiness didn't make me stronger, the Ancient One continued. It made me less than I was, less than I could have been. I survived for 10,000 years, but I stopped living within the first 100. He placed his hand on Siajan's head, a gesture that was almost paternal. You have reminded me of something I forgot long ago, young one, something important, something precious. He paused. The human woman, Su Min, you truly love her. Siajan's voice was barely a whisper, more than I ever thought possible. And she loves you. Siajan hesitated. I don't know, we've known each other only 3 days, but I hope one day she might. The Ancient One nodded slowly. Then go to her, find out, build a life with her or apart from her but live, truly live. And when the centuries weigh heavy on you, when the darkness threatens to consume you again, remember this moment. Remember that an ancient monster looked at you and saw hope. He turned back to the council. The accused is pardoned. The covenant stands, but exceptions exist for those who prove worthy of them. Let this be recorded, let it be known. And just like that, it was over. But there was still one loose end. When Siajan emerged from the council's realm, the first light of dawn was painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. He stood at the edge of Yonhwa's valley, breathing in the cool morning air, feeling the weight of centuries lifting from his shoulders. Well, he had survived, he was free. And somewhere in the palace behind him, Su Min was waiting. But before he could take a single step toward her, a voice cut through the morning stillness. Impressive, truly impressive. Isiajan spun around. Kang Yiwon stepped out of the shadows, flanked by a dozen armed men. His expensive suit was immaculate, his smile was cold, and in his hand he held something that made Siajan's blood run cold. An ancient dagger, its blade inscribed with symbols that had been forbidden for millennia. You didn't think I would give up that easily, did you? Kang said pleasantly. When the council didn't immediately destroy you, I knew I would have to take matters into my own hands. His smile widened. Did you know that there are ways to kill a vampire permanently? Ancient ways, forgotten ways, ways that even your precious council has lost track of. He raised the dagger, and its blade began to glow with a sickly green light. I paid a fortune for this, traveled to the ends of the earth, made deals with things that should not exist, all for this moment, all for the pleasure of watching you die. His eyes hardened. You took something from me, you interfered with my business, you made me look weak in front of my organization. He gestured to his men. Now I'm going to take everything from you, starting with your existence and ending with that pretty little maid you risked everything to save. The Siajan's jaw tightened. You will not touch her. No, and who's going to stop me? You, Kang laughed. Look around you, Vampire King. You're alone, exhausted, fresh from whatever trial the council put you through, and I have a weapon designed to destroy your kind. He stepped closer. Any last words? The Siajan was silent for a moment. Then he smiled. Just one, he said calmly. Look behind you. Kang's eyes narrowed. Do you really think I'm foolish enough to? He's not lying. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. It was soft, feminine, and it carried a weight of power that made even Kang's men take a step back. Murray stepped out of the morning mist, her silver hair flowing in a wind that didn't exist, and behind her came others, dozens of them. Vampires, spirits, beings of every shape and size, all of them united by one thing. They had found sanctuary in Yonhua, and they were not going to let its founder fall. You made a mistake, human, Murray said, her amethyst eyes blazing. You thought that because Siajan values kindness, he must be weak. You thought that because he chose mercy over cruelty, he must stand alone. She smiled, and it was not a kind smile. You were wrong. What happened next was over in seconds. The armed men scattered, overwhelmed by forces they couldn't comprehend. The ancient dagger was ripped from Kang's hand by invisible forces, and the crime lord himself was brought to his knees, surrounded by creatures who had every reason to despise humanity and yet refrained from killing him. Because that was the way of Yonhua. That was what Siajan had built. What do you want? Kang gasped, his confidence shattered. The Siajan walked toward him slowly. I want you to understand something, he said. Something that men like you never seem to grasp. Power doesn't come from fear. It doesn't come from cruelty. It doesn't come from making people disappear in the night. Well, he knelt down to meet Kang's eyes. Power comes from connection, from love, from the bonds we forge with others. You spent your whole life trying to make people fear you, and in the end, you're alone, surrounded by people who follow you because they're afraid, not because they believe in you. Well, he gestured to the beings around him. I spent 4 centuries learning this lesson. I hope for your sake you learn it faster than I did. Well, he stood. You will leave this place. You will never speak of what you saw here. And you will spend the rest of your life knowing that you faced a monster, a true monster, and he chose to let you live. Well, he turned away. That mercy is my gift to you. Use it wisely. Su Min was standing at the gates of the palace when Siajan finally reached her. The morning sun was fully up now, painting the valley in shades of gold and green. She was still wearing the pale blue hanbok, and the pendant, his mother's pendant, hung around her neck, gleaming in the light. She was crying, but when she saw him walking toward her, alive, unharmed, free, her tears turned to something else. Joy, pure, overwhelming joy. She ran. She ran across the courtyard and threw herself into his arms, and he caught her, lifting her off her feet and holding her so tightly that she could barely breathe. You came back, she sobbed against his shoulder. You promised you would come back, and you did. Always, he whispered into her hair, I will always come back to you. They stood there for a long moment, wrapped in each other's arms, surrounded by the beauty of a valley that had waited 800 years for its master to find his way home. Finally, Su Min pulled back and looked up at him. What happens now? She asked. Siajan smiled, a real smile, full of warmth and hope and possibilities. Now, he said, we live, not just exist, live together for as long as you'll have me. Su Min laughed through her tears. I'm human. I have maybe 50 or 60 years left if I'm lucky. Then I will cherish every single one of them, Siajan said softly. And when they're over, I will carry the memory of you with me for eternity. You will never be forgotten, Su Min. You will never be invisible again. He leaned forward and pressed his forehead to hers. You saved me, he whispered. You saved a monster who had forgotten how to hope. And for that, I will spend every remaining moment of your life making sure you know how precious you are. Su Min reached up and cupped his face in her hands. You're not a monster, she said. You never were, you were just lost, and now you're found. She kissed him, and in that kiss was everything, 400 years of loneliness, 3 days of impossible connection, and the promise of a future neither of them had dared to dream of. Epilogue 5 years later. The cherry blossoms were blooming in Yonhua. Su Min sat on the balcony of the palace, watching the petals drift down like pink snow. She was 38 now, with a few strands of silver beginning to appear in her hair. She had never been more beautiful. Beside her, Siajan sat in the shade, carefully out of the direct sunlight. His appearance hadn't changed, it never would, but there was something different about him now, something softer, something that looked almost like contentment. Tell me again, Sumin said, leaning against his shoulder. Tell me about the night we met. Siajan smiled. They did this often, reliving the story of how they found each other. It never got old. It was raining, he began. It had been raining for 3 days. And as his voice washed over her, Sumin closed her eyes and smiled. She had spent so many years being invisible, being nobody, being the maid who disappeared into the background of other people's lives. But now she was seen. Now she was loved. Now she was the center of a story that would be told for centuries, the story of a human woman who looked at a vampire king and saw not a monster, but a man. The story of kindness that conquered darkness. The story of courage that faced ancient powers and won. The story of love that proved stronger than 400 years of loneliness. And somewhere in the shadows of the palace, watching the couple on the balcony with ancient, patient eyes, the ancient one of the council smiled. He had been right about Siajan. A hope had returned to the world. And that hope had a name. It was Sumin. It was love. It was the simple, extraordinary truth that monsters could become heroes, that darkness could become light, and that even the oldest, coldest heart could learn to beat again. If only it was brave enough to try.